Hi everyone, I'm Shelly and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another Question the Narrative video, and today's topic is, why did the Nephilim have red hair? I wasn't sure what to do my video about today. I knew that I wanted to do one, but I didn't have any one topic that was really sticking with me enough that I wanted to delve into it. I actually posted this earlier today on my community page. I found it on Instagram on the Blurry Creatures podcast feed. And I found it funny because I have red hair. And I even said, as a redhead, I find this deeply concerning. And it says, maybe she's born with it, maybe it's Nephilim. And then it says Mount Hermon. And obviously it's a play on the Maybelline commercials. But there was pretty much feedback on this. A lot of people seem to either find it funny or just to be interested in the topic. And so I started thinking about that. Why were the Nephilim redheads? Not always redheads. Sometimes they were said to have blonde hair, but usually red or blonde hair and blue or green eyes. And I actually alluded to that in one of my more recent videos where I said about how the Nephilim have red hair, and there's just this stuff going around where if you have red hair, then that must mean that you are a descendant of the Nephilim. And we're going to explore that today. So first of all, let's just go over why we're saying that the Nephilim have red hair. There are actually stories from all over the world that talk about giants who were the Nephilim. The Nephilim were giants. At least the earlier generations of them. I believe that over time they started losing their stature, and that many of them probably walk among us today. And like my friend Donita from Prairie Dust said, we all may have a bit of Nephilim DNA in us, no matter what color our hair is. But, it can't be argued that it is said that giants and Nephilim typically were described as having red hair. So here's just one example, and I've talked about this before, about the 13-foot tall red-haired giant of Kandahar, allegedly killed by U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan. And so we have this one here, and that is supposed to be him there, and you see he has red hair. Then here we have the Paracas skulls. Now, I will say the Paracas skulls have been made famous actually by L.A. Marzulli and Brian Forrester. And L.A. Marzulli adamantly believes that these elongated skulls from Paracas, Peru, are the Nephilim. And one interesting thing about many of these elongated skulls is that they have red hair. One thing, though, is that they are not giants. And so this is where I was talking about that over time, they likely just kind of, as our DNA breaks down, they likely got shorter and shorter and shorter over time, but retained these elongated skulls. Now, for those of you who have never looked into the Paracas skulls or have never heard of them, before you start to think that it's just an example of cranial deformation, which did happen very often, let me just go over with you why this does not seem to be the case with these skulls found in Paracas. In a normal human skull, there should be a suture which goes from the frontal plate clear over the dome of the skull, separating the parietal plates, the two separate plates, and connecting with the occipital plate in the rear, said Marzulli. We see many skulls in Paracas that are completely devoid of a sagittal suture. There is a disease known as craniosynostosis, which results in the fusing together of the two parietal plates. However, Marzulli said there is no evidence of this disease in the Paracas skulls. So right here, we have the sagittal suture. And very often, this is missing on those elongated skulls. And the typical human skull should have this suture here. So actually, right here is L.A. Marzulli holding one of the Paracas skulls. And as you can see, there is no sagittal suture. There is no zigzag line going down, separating the two parietal plates. Now, this article mainly talks about the genetic testing that was done on these skulls. So I'm going to leave a link in the description if you would like to read that. But I'm just focusing mainly on the hair color for today, for obvious reasons. So it says here, the results are also consistent with the fact that many of the Paracas skulls still contain traces of red hair, a color that is not natively found in South America, which remember is where these skulls are from, but originates in the Middle East and Europe. No academics, as far as we can tell, can explain why some of the skulls that still have hair are red or even blonde, writes Brian Forrester. The idea that this is from time or bleaching has now been disproven by two hair experts. For the ancient Paracas people, at least, they had blonde to reddish hair that is 30% thinner than Native American hair. It's genetic. And again, as you can see, it's a darker auburn color here, and it is not consistent with South American native hair. So another example that I have here is of the red-haired giant cannibals at Lovelock Cave. And yes, I talked about them in a recent video as well. But here we have yet another example of red-haired giants. So I've had some people question me in the comments asking me, well, why do you always say that the giants were said to have red hair? Well, this is why. Because there are worldwide accounts of these giants having red hair. This isn't something that I am making up off the top of my head. So here we have, this is in Nevada, and here we have Afghanistan, and here we have skulls found in Paracas, Peru. So I'm sure that most of you already know this, but I'm just going to say it for anyone who is watching who might not know this, that the Nephilim and the giants came from the mating of fallen angels, or they are sometimes called watchers, with human women. So that is what we're talking about when we are referring to the Nephilim or to giants. So one of the theories going around is that the reason that the giants had red hair, and hence everyone today who has red hair might be descendants of the Nephilim, is because they must be getting that red hair from the angelic beings. Because typically when you think of angelic beings, they're thought of as being golden haired or having red hair. And as far as I know, I could be wrong, but I have never seen any actual descriptions of angelic being, at least not what their color, the color of their hair is. So I think that this is just an assumption that people make. Also because you very often will hear that Adam and Eve, since the Garden of Eden is typically thought to have been in the Middle East, or at least in northeastern Africa, that it's thought that they had brown skin and dark hair. So they automatically think, okay, well then that DNA must be coming from the angelic bloodline. So what that must mean is that if you have red hair, then you must have that angelic DNA in you in order for that to have come about. In fact, I do have a friend who is an RN who was telling me that when she was studying to be a nurse, she learned that red hair is actually genetically different from, say, blonde hair and brown hair. It is something different. So that is something interesting to think about. And if you look here, it says that red hair, also known as orange hair or ginger hair, is a human hair color found in only 1 to 2% of the world population. And it has appearing with greater frequency among people of northern or northwestern European ancestry, which is interesting that the giants are worldwide and are also said to have red hair. So when you think about the fact that they're such a tiny percentage, and the fact that red hair is genetically different from, and I might not be using the proper term, I'm just going to tell you that right now, but it is different than blonde and brown hair. So that is something to think about. But I think that there's also something else that we need to think about on the opposite end of the spectrum, something that I don't think a lot of people think about. As I mentioned earlier, A lot of people believe that Adam and Eve must have had dark hair and darker skin because of where the Garden of Eden is said to have been located. But this is about questioning the narrative, and I know that I'm going to ruffle some feathers, but I always do. So I should be used to that by now, right? Okay. What if we're thinking about this all wrong? What if Adam and Eve did not have darker hair, or at least not both of them? One of them may have. What if they did not both have dark hair or darker skin? What if one of them had the DNA carrying the genes for blonde or red hair, and that the genes are actually coming from Adam and Eve that carry the red hair? Here we have the word Adam. Obviously, we know who Adam is, right? Adam is both the proper name of the first human and a designation for humankind. God himself gave this appellation to Adam and Eve. The color red lies behind the Hebrew root Adam. This may reflect the red soil from which he was made. So I'm going to show you this again, okay? The color red lies behind the Hebrew root. So rather than thinking of the red soil from which he was made, I am thinking, what if the color red is associated with Adam because he had red hair? And this would not be unheard of, because we know that Esau was born with red hair. And some people will say that Esau had Nephilim blood. And I'm not going to dispute that. That isn't something that I've looked into enough. But we also have King David, who is described at the very least, as being ruddy, which would mean blushing, which typically means pale skin with the ability to get sunburned from being outside. So what I am trying to get at is that sometimes we tend to think only that they must have been darker skinned people. What if that is not the case? And what if the red in the hair of the giants is actually coming from the human parents? Here we have an interesting article where they believe that they found a statue of Joseph from the Bible with the coat of many colors. And this is a rather long article, or else I would read it with you. But if you're familiar with the story of Joseph and the coat of many colors, his father was Jacob, and later named Israel. And Joseph is the one who was sold into slavery by his brothers, and then he went to work for the Pharaoh. But in this article, I'll just read it to you. Inside the chapel of the tomb was a statue, and I believe this was found in Egypt. Well, that would probably help for me to look at. Yes, okay. Why multicolored coat discovered in Egypt tomb could be Joseph's. Egypt experts were stunned when they discovered a statue of a high official in Goshen, decorated with what appeared to be a multicolored coat, leading them to speculate it could represent Joseph from the Bible. So that's where I'm getting this from. So this was found in Egypt, and it was thought to represent Joseph, okay? Inside the chapel of the tomb was a statue. What we know from the statue is that this man had red hair. He had red hair. He had pale yellow skin. He had a throwing stick across his shoulder, and on the back of his shoulder, we see the faintest remains of paint-colored stripes from a multicolored coat. Dr. Roll claimed all the evidence pointed to the story of Joseph. He added, that matches exactly with the story of Joseph in the Bible. So I know that I'm going to get a lot of pushback on this, but I think that there is some evidence that Adam and Eve, or possibly at least Adam, would have had red hair, and that some of the human descendants, because of the DNA being passed down, would have had red hair, which would basically mean that just because you have red hair does not mean that you necessarily have Nephilim blood in you. That's what I'm getting at. It could be either or. And I think it's something that's fun to think about, But I know that a lot of people, believers especially, when they hear this, they get scared. They're thinking, oh my word, what if it's true? What if I have Nephilim blood in me? Does that make me inherently evil? And no, I would say no, just because by this point in time, it would have been watered down. And if you have accepted, Jesus as your savior, and you are know who he is and what he has done for you, then I would say that even if you did have Nephilim blood in you, it would have been watered down to the point where it's moot at this time, and it would just be DNA. But I would also say that just because you have red hair doesn't mean that it automatically came from the angels. I think that's speculation. All of this is speculation. It could go either way. It could come from either the Watchers, or it could have come from Adam and Eve. Because, and I will also say that in the book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy by Gary Wayne, in chapter 14, he actually talks about a group of people who were said to have been formed on day 6, and they were called the Blackheads. Now, I have mentioned this in one of my other videos, I think the one about Adam and Eve, and what that is basically saying is that there are 2 separate creation accounts. Now, some people will say that it is just it's just retellings of the same account. Other people will say no, it is 2 parallel creation accounts. The day 6 people are a separate race of people from Adam and Eve. The day 6 people were just the general populace being created. And according to at least Gary Wayne in Genesis 6, and according to the Sumerians, they would have had black hair, these people who were created on day 6, because again, they were known as the Blackheads. I don't know which one it is, but I think that it is interesting. If the people on day 6 would have been known as the Blackheads, it would also mean that Adam and Eve, who were not then created at the same time, if you are following this narrative, would have been distinguished from them by not having black hair. So I think that is interesting to think about. And I'll just read this quickly to you. It just says, according to Sumerian traditions, derived from the Assyrian tablets, the first humans were known as the Blackheads. Although most of the antediluvian clay tablets have been lost to history, many survive to the time of Ashurbanipal, circa 668 to 633 BC. So again, that's just a quick passage from chapter 14 on the Genesis 6 conspiracy. So that's another really interesting look at things. And again, I'm not telling you to, just 100% believe everything that you read right away. Research things, because I research things all the time, and I am on the fence about most things, to be quite honest. If it is not explicitly spelled out in the Bible, then for me, it is much easier to question. So for example, in Genesis, well, actually the entire book of Genesis is said to be written in a linear fashion. If all of Genesis was written in a linear fashion from start to finish, okay, from the earliest of times, and then it just goes along chronologically, if that is consistent with all of Genesis, why would there be 2 accounts of the same story that would go exactly opposite of the entire rest of the book? If there would be 2 creation accounts of the same thing, that is the only place in the entire book where it would not be written in a linear fashion. So that really is something to think about. So that's really all that I have to discuss on this topic today, because again, it's just kind of a topic that sprung up at me. So it's nothing that I've really researched deeply. I just thought it would be interesting just to kind of discuss the 2 possibilities of where this red hair might be coming from on these Nephilim. And it is, it's important to me because, again, I have red hair. My 2 brothers had red hair. My mother had red hair. Grandparents with red hair. And then of my 11 children, 7 of them have blonde hair. and 7 of them have either blue eyes or hazel eyes. So yeah, so it's interesting to me, but it's not something that I'm going to worry myself about or even think too much about. It's just an interesting topic. Anyway, I wanted to share this comment in closing, and it has nothing to do with Nephilim at all, but it has everything to do with everything that I talk about. So actually, in essence, you could say it also has something to do with the Nephilim. And this is the commenter may be right. I have personally seen history get altered. Years back, I was given a contract by a large institution to write the history behind a certain anniversary that was being celebrated. It was completely vetted by a historian to ensure its accuracy. 10 years later, a new text was written and was completely different from what I had originally written. I challenged my client, saying that the new facts were inaccurate, and from an ethical standpoint, they couldn't just change the story. The answer, well, that's how we're telling it now. There you go. Very disturbing, but at the same time, not surprising at all. We know that they're putting things down the memory hole. If you've ever read 1984, you know that reference. We know they're changing history all the time. Why would they not be changing history about giants and covering up the truth about that? That's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one either here or over on Instagram. And if you like my work and would like to check out my Patreon page, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well. And I hope you have a great day.